today we're going to talk about the inevitable result of the solar myth. And you've talked so beautifully about that myth in the last 2 days. But we need just to look at what is the inevitability of that myth. What are we really looking at in the future if we don't find ways to heal ourselves? And in the last segment, we'll talk about those ways of healing. But first, let's begin with what we're really looking at as a result of this solar myth.
Well, I think the real problem with the solar myth, when we're gripped by it unconsciously, when we don't know what it's doing to us or how it's possessing us, the danger is that we always have to have an enemy. There's always going to be a new enemy. Now we had Hitler as the enemy, then we had the Soviet Union as the enemy, now we have terrorism as the enemy, we've had UFOs as the possible enemy. There always has to be an enemy, and this is the major problem, because where there has to be an enemy, there will always be the industrial military complex that Eisenhower warned in his last address to the nation in America. He warned us, beware of this military industrial complex, because they will always be looking to develop new weaponry, and they'll be looking to the next war. So this is the major problem with solar mythology. And somehow, also, I want to read out something about nuclear weapons, because this is the major danger facing us all now. It's hanging over us like a sword of Damocles. And I think the whole population of the world needs to be aware of the true horror of these weapons, which is never really talked about. Not since the 80s, anyway.
That's right. And I think that once the Cold War ended, people felt that the threat of nuclear weapons no longer existed. But indeed they do, and you can help us to realize just to what degree they do.
I'd just like to read out this from a pamphlet that's been produced by someone who's deeply concerned, and he has written, there are still around 26,000 nuclear warheads in existence. These are enough to incinerate the entire population of the planet 5 times over. At least 2,600 of these weapons are on high alert all the time. This means that they can be launched within about 45 minutes or less of the warning of an attack. The President or Prime Minister will have 10 to 15 minutes to make a decision on launch after the Chiefs of Staff have given their opinion that we are under attack. The Chiefs of Staff have 10 to 15 minutes to decide if we are really under attack after receipt of electronic information that we are. The existence of nuclear weapons constitutes a continuous and totally unnecessary threat to the population of our planet, making both true peace and peace of mind impossible. The people of the world do not want these weapons. They want peace. Of the 192 states of the United Nations, only 8, and with North Korea 9 possibly, have built and deploy nuclear weapons. The remaining 184 states are put at risk by the 8 or 9 who have them. Of the 8 states that have developed these weapons, in no case has the populations of those states been asked if they want them. Now that is really outrageous. How has this situation come about?
Certainly not a democratic situation.
No, and how have we allowed this situation, as supposedly democratic populations of these countries, democratic government, how have we allowed this situation to arise? There's been plenty of protest, but no effective opposition to their being held indefinitely and potentially used by any government that chooses to use them. And of course the danger now is that they fall into the hands of terrorists, because we've set up the situation in splitting the atom. We've been led inevitably to the situation where we can be destroyed by other people, or where we destroy ourselves by using them and having the return reaction. And so we have to grow out of this mythology. We have to grow beyond it.
Absolutely, and I think sometimes we might think, well, we won't use it as a nation, but indeed the United States has used the nuclear weapon.
Exactly.
And what is even more frightening is that during the Cold War, it was geese once who set off an alarm.
Really? Yes, I hadn't forgotten that.
And made it look as though there was a threat of nuclear war from the Soviet Union.
Yes.
It was discovered, but I mean, if our survival rests on such a fine, fragile situation, then, and of course now with the terrorists, it's even
it is
more
very, very dangerous.
Yes.
But we brought this situation into being. America and the Western world had brought it into being by going along with the idea that it was a good idea to have these weapons as a deterrent.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really the unconscious aggression of the solar era coming to a head, as it were, in our present situation in the world.
That's right. And when I say the terrorist, I think we have to realize that outside the solar myth, outside that perspective, is that we are terrorists. The United States certainly has acted as a terrorist.
As a terrorist,
and
yes.
that we are all fighting the other from our particular perspective, and in that sense we have been terrorists. So it's the inevitability is just lying.
Yes, because once you
ready
have a
to
weapon,
activate.
once you have a weapon, it's inevitable that it will be used sooner
That's
or
right.
later.
Mm-hmm. There'll always be a reason.
And we've created an enemy which now comes against us with the very weapons that we've developed. So we're responsible for our own demise in that sense, if it happens in that way. If say, the Islamist terrorists get hold of the weapon in Pakistan, we've brought all this into being. We can't blame the other.
No.
That's the important thing.
No, we cannot.
So, how can we heal all this?
Now this
That's
is
the great question.
This is the more delightful part, I think, because we really can heal. I think we have to realize that sometimes we can become so depressed and think that there's no way out, but in fact there is, and that's what you're going to talk about.
Yes, and I think that it's important to realize that every individual, as Jung said, the individual is the thread on which the balance of the world hangs, really, that the individual can do things which he or she may not even know or think about at the moment, but just in following the deepest promptings of the heart, the deepest promptings of our instincts and feelings, we are, each one of us, capable of doing something, even in the smallest possible way.
And it's really out of the work of each individual that a new myth will arise.
Yes, we have to create a new myth, and this is what we're going to talk about in this next section of our discussion. So I think that, first of all, I'd like to go back to the idea that there is what I call a cosmic soul, and that all our individual selves or souls are part of this great cosmic soul. There's something like a vast internet, if you like, a cosmic internet, to which we all belong, in which we all participate, and which is a great web of life, in which no part is separate from any other part. That is at the deepest level. Obviously we don't see it so clearly in this world, how we interact with each other, but I'd like to emphasize that there is this entity, this cosmic entity, the life of the whole universe or the whole cosmos, of which we are a part at the deepest level. And that in our individual selves we carry the awareness of this, that we belong to this divinity, because it is a divinity, whether we call it soul, whether we call it spirit. Soul is the feminine name that's been given to it, spirit is the masculine name. But in essence, these are one, these are married, as it were. So we should think of ourselves in a new way as belonging to this greater entity, living within it, not as something that's outside us.
So you are really saying that in our culture, soul is used for the individual
Yes, it's used in an
aspect
individual
of that,
sense.
and spirit is that cosmic soul, the cosmic whole to which we all belong
We all
and
belong.
participate in.
Exactly. These are just two names for the same thing. And the idea of cosmic soul in the feminine sense goes back to the great mother of the Neolithic. That's where it originated, in the great goddesses of the Bronze Age, that the whole of life came forth from them, like Hathor, for instance, gave birth to life. And that's where it originates. So if we can understand that there's this thread that's gone all the way through, but we've lost the connection to the thread or to the tradition, but it's coming back now, and this is what a lot of my writing is about, is bringing it back, showing how it was lost and how we can recover it. And I think that we find it, first of all, articulated in writing in Plato. In his idea, he actually says that psyche tou kosmou, he calls it, which is the soul of the cosmos, or the soul of the all. Then we have in Plotinus the idea of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. But calling it the soul of the world doesn't really give it the cosmic dimension. So there can be, if you like, a collective soul of humanity, which we can call the soul of the world. But beyond that, there's the soul of the greater cosmos.
And this is a beautiful vision to have, for people to realize that certainly we are not separated, but that everything that we do individually affects the species mind and soul, and that everything we do as a species is affecting the cosmic soul.
That's right, and this has been found, in fact, in science with the idea, or the rather discovery of non-locality, that the spin of the electron at one end of the Earth affects something at the other end. The fluttering of a butterfly's wing can affect something in a totally different area. So this is something to bear in mind, that we are connected, and that what we do matters.
That what we do matters.
Yeah.
And even the small things, and especially now when we're in such a state of chaos, each individual may indeed have much more influence than before.
Then he realizes, that he or she realizes.
And certainly
absolutely.
more than we realize. But if we think in terms of fluttering of a butterfly wing, we think, well, that's not very much. I can do something at least of that magnitude.
Exactly, however small. It's the intention too, to follow the intention, to follow it through into materialization, as it were, of the intention.
To have the
to
desire,
have the idea, to have the desire, to have the longing to do something, and then to follow the little hints that come.
That's right.
That tell us what to do and how to do it. It may seem something. I remember a man who is now a very prominent position in Costa Rica, which incidentally has given up all its weapons. He said, follow every single intuition, even if you get 80 a day. Try and follow them. It's a bit much.
But that's wonderful.
But it's a good idea.
Get so many. Yes. And I'm sure they'd have some relationship so that each thing we do would affect it.
That's right.
All the other 79. I love that.
And also, I think one of the most important things that we need to change is our image of deity, our image of spirit or God. Because we've had this image for nearly 3,000 years now in the patriarchal religions. And the problem has been with that it's split off creation from the creator. So there's a gap, or an abyss, if you like, between spirit and this dimension of reality. And I think that's something that could be overcome if we changed our image of spirit, so that spirit became something which included all realities. It includes every blade of grass, every tiny petal of a flower, every aspect of our own being, including the physical body. So spirit includes physical reality. It's not something different or separate from it.
Yes,
I think that's terribly important. So we have an image of spirit, we live within the being of God, not that as God as something distant from ourselves.
And this is also what was held in the lunar myth. And now we can hold that consciously.
Exactly.
We don't simply participate in the presence of the divine as the divine ourselves, but that now we can consciously realize that we are. Yes, what that means, that we are part of the divine. We are divine and we are creators.
That means also that everything is sacred. Everything is divine. And if we treat each other, or if we destroy the earth, or if we use its resources, we are actually doing something contrary to the sacred. We are injuring the sacred.
That's right.
We're creating a great wound in the body of God, if you like.
Which will be a wound in us.
And which will be a wound in us, because if we're all, as I said, part of this greater whole, then what we do to the earth or to each other eventually rebounds on us. We are affected by it.
And it seems that what you're saying really is that if we can expand our image of God, and understanding that we are part of God and a part of spirit as soul, then that means that we will be in a process of awakening and being observant to and sensitive to certainly the feelings and experiences of others, that we can truly hear others.
Yes, we can truly hear others. That's a very good way of putting it.
Yes, to hear and to see and to allow their reality to participate in our consciousness. And then we can move to the animal world and to then the plants and stones, and realize that there's consciousness that is spirit at every level of being.
At every level, yes.
And we can become conscious of it by the allowing our sensitivity to deepen and expand.
Yes, I think that's very well put. I think that's very important. This is all about really the awakening of the Sleeping Beauty, to go back to that beautiful fairy tale.
Yes.
This is the awakening of the human soul within the greater soul, as it were, and becoming aware that it is divine, that deity is incarnate in this dimension, in us, and that it's taken all these eons of earth time for us to realize that. There have been great pioneers like Jesus and the great teachers of humanity who've always known this and tried to teach it to the people, but it was distorted by religion, and it lost the essence of the teaching, which is that we are all divine.
That's right.
But there is a danger here, of course. There's the danger of inflation. There's the danger of identifying with the divine and thinking that God is speaking directly to you and through you, and that you're told to go out and do this, that, and the other in the name of God. And that's been the danger in the past with the people who have become warriors, as it were, who've gone out to destroy the enemy according to the will of God, so they thought. But we have to be aware of the danger of inflation, but at the same time realize that we are this divinity, and that we're here to take care of the divinity of the earth. And we're not here to use and abuse it, but to take care of it,
to exploit
and
it,
protect it.
Well, it would seem to me that if we misunderstand the voices of the divine or the feeling and being of the divine, it's probably because we've only understood it conceptually. If we've allowed that deep, direct knowledge to exist within us, that is developed by our sensitivity, then we sink deep down into our own soul life, and we can hear and see the soul life of others and of the whole universe. If we do that, there's no way we can think that we're the only one and that we are therefore God and the rest isn't. Because if we go deep within ourselves to the whole cosmos, we know that we are divine, the whole universe is divine, and that God isn't going to be speaking only to me as an elected one.
Exactly, yes, or to an elected group.
Or group.
Yeah.
That there's truly no such thing as the elect. We are all that. We are all
we
soul
are all
in
elect,
spirit.
and so is everything else on the planet. We're not the only species.
That's right. And to know soul and spirit means that we would never want to destroy another part of ourselves.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that this is what Jung was trying to do in reconnecting the conscious mind with the deep aspect, with the deep level of the soul. He was trying to overcome the polarizing effect of the thinking of the solar era. And so he emphasized the need, as you said, to go within ourselves, to discover this deeper level in ourselves, to encounter our deepest feelings, and also the more dangerous aspect of the instinct, which is talked about, which is the will to power, to encounter it there and to face it there and say, we're going to transform this will to power into the capacity to serve the planet, to develop compassion. For all life.
Yes.
There is that transformation, it can't be denied. As you go within, you do find the will to power in various forms. Each one of us can recognize it. But it can be transformed. And this was the teaching of the great, particularly the teaching of Jesus and the Buddha, to transform our consciousness so that it serves the divine.
Yes, and I think it would be a natural thing if we first of all contact this tremendous energy within us in a way that would be self-serving or protective for our own survival. And then we say, that's right, but we don't need to do that. That the only way truly to protect ourselves or survive is by protecting the community and the earth and the cosmos. So once we begin to expand who we really are, then we realize that drive for power is for the whole and not just for me.
Yes, it's for service.
But maybe we need to look at how we do this. I'm sure many people are saying, well, that's just fine. I can go within and I can, well, we've already said to really be attentive, I think, is the very first step, to listen, to really take in what's going on within us as well as other. So, but we also haven't really talked about a deeper level of that would be to be very attentive to the dreams and to the intuitions, and perhaps you'll talk about that.
Yes, I'll talk about that a little later on.
Okay, because everyone wants practical steps of how they can actually begin to realize what you're saying.
I think we'll come to that near the end when we come to the practical side. I just wanted to read out this very beautiful passage from somebody called Duan Elgin, in which it sums up really what you've just been saying, I think, and what I feel very strongly. He says, our actual identity or experience of who we are is vastly bigger than we thought. We are moving from a strictly personal consciousness to a conscious appreciation of ourselves as integral to the cosmos.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Integral to the cosmos, that's such a beautiful phrase. In this new paradigm, our sense of identity takes on a paradoxical and mysterious quality. We are both observer and observed. knower and that which is known. We are each completely unique and yet completely connected with the entire universe.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's a lovely image, I think.
It's beautiful, and I think
We must keep our unique individuality,
yes,
but know that we're connected with the entire universe.
and many people would like to make us think that our individuality is not important, that it's absorbed back into the whole at death, but that isn't true. Life,
Yes.
nature, spirit, soul loves the individual and will do everything it can to nurture and protect it.
Yes, I think I'm just going to come to that in a minute when we talk about death. But I think that it's important to remember that the ego is absolutely vital in this work. It's not something to be overcome and got rid of. The ego and individuality is fine once it knows that it has this relationship with the whole, that
That's
it's not
it.
out for itself,
Oh,
that it isn't
absolutely.
serving itself. So anyway, to finish his passage, he says, awakening to the miraculous nature of our identity as simultaneously unique and interconnected with a living universe can help us overcome the species arrogance and the sense of separation that threaten our future.
Mm-hmm.
And with that goes the understanding that the universe is alive, not a dead universe as we've been told. So those are very important things. And I think with this change of consciousness, this change of perspective, we need to understand that our concept of death is completely destructive, really. We look upon death as the end. We look upon it as perhaps the final separation from our loved ones. And the indigenous cultures and the lunar culture, the lunar era, knew that there was no death, that death is simply a change of worlds, and that we move into another dimension perhaps, or perhaps to another planetary system, another galaxy, who knows? We haven't got enough knowledge yet.
No,
But
because we've been too afraid of it being the end.
Well, we haven't been allowed to develop interest in all this sort of thing, which is now coming in, thank goodness. So we have to change our concept of death as the grim reaper. That's one thing to get rid of altogether. And to realize that while there is separation, temporary separation from our loved ones, there is no ultimate final separation. We're reunited with them after their death. They each in turn meets the generation before that has gone on. And so there's a continuous, as the lunar cultures understood, there's a continuous thread of relationship between the ancestors thousands and thousands of years ago and the people who are coming into incarnation in the future.
Yes.
There's no thread that's broken. It's an unbroken thread.
But the Grim Reaper is such an accurate symbol for the solar myth, because it shows the ability to cut and to sever.
Exactly.
And in a very fearful way.
Yeah.
So it is a symbol of the solar myth, not of reality.
Exactly. So as soon as possible, we need to get rid of that, chuck it out, and formulate a new image of reality where there is really only life. Death is a phase in moving between two dimensions of reality.
Just as birth is.
Just as birth is. We come into this life from another reality and we return to another reality. And I think we take with us the experience that we've had in this life, and we can carry it over into those dimensions or whatever.
Yes, so what we learn here, what we achieve here, what we become here, helps us as we step into that other dimension.
Yes, and it also helps those in those other dimensions.
Yes.
As Jung said, the people on the other side look to us really to learn from what we are experiencing here on this earth.
Yes.
So they may be all around us, as it were, watching and waiting to see what we do in this present situation, because it will affect them too. They won't want to come back to an earth that is desolate and destroyed, and they won't want to come back to this ghastly situation where the threat of death hangs over us all.
Absolutely not. And I think people who have stepped into that other dimension use their healing experience learned from this side to help people who are arriving in the other dimension who are wounded
or
by
traumatized.
this, or traumatized by the solar myth.
Or who may believe that death is the end of everything, and then they find themselves in this other dimension and they don't know where they are, what's happened to their body. They don't understand. They have consciousness still, but they have no connection to the body that they had in this physical dimension.
That's right.
So that's very frightening if they thought that there was nothing at the end of life.
They need that help, and that help is available. And there have been many stories of people who have died as a result of drugs, and they arrive on the other side, and that there are people there loving and helpful and
healing them.
and healing, so that parents who have lost children in that way to death can really be assured that on the other side there are healers. There is loving, healing energy awaiting.
Exactly, and there are people waiting to meet them and to help them, and that all they have to do is ask for help if they're frightened and find themselves in a dark place, to call out for help, and help will come. This has been authenticated by so many messages from the other side that it's simply ludicrous that it's not widely known in our culture.
I know, but as you said before, we haven't been allowed to develop these aspects of ourselves because we can't really discuss it with others or share it with others. And that's been the same here, is that this powerful, important information that can be so healing to us has not been allowed out through
it hasn't been
channels
welcomed.
where it can be heard by many, many people.
Exactly. Well, maybe things will change. Let's hope they will
Let's
change.
hope. This is an effort.
This is an effort. So I think we've talked that the change in the image of God, that's one great change that needs to come, and the change in our concept of death. And that will contribute to a huge healing. This will release great energy because it's been blocked, like that hedge of thorns has been blocking. But in the story of the Sleeping Beauty, it says that that hedge of thorns can turn to roses for the right prince, that is, if you approach with the right attitude. All this inheritance can be dissolved or jettisoned or let go, keeping the good aspects of it, but letting go of the ones that really block our evolution.
Yes, I think that's something that we forget, is that the power of the intention within you, within me, actually is what can dissolve the thorns. We want to change ourselves and our world, and that begins the dissolution of that hedge of thorns.
Yes, exactly. And
then we have to continue with it, as you say.
Yeah, we have to find the ways of putting it into practical reality, but the intention is the first thing, and the longing to change all this, and to get out of this almost like a nightmare we've been living in for so long, in which everything has been set against everything else. And
for thousands of years.
For thousands of years, and the divinity of life has not been recognized, despite the greatest spiritual teachers that we could possibly have.
That's
We've
right.
missed the message. We've misinterpreted the message.
And maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about that now or later, that many spiritual teachers have given us a very profound message of direct inner experience with the divine, but they have often negated the body and the material world. And so the new myth will honor
and include the material world.
Yes.
Because
and the passion and the senses.
Yes, there must have been the intention of divinity, of the mind of the cosmos, or the soul of the cosmos, to want to incarnate, as it were, in the whole process of earthly life, even though it's taken eons of earth time for us to develop the consciousness we have, and to know that we have the possibility of relationship with the cosmos, and that we can discover who we are. It's taken such a long time, even though the great teachers have known this, but the intention was there, and we're becoming aware of the intention and how extraordinary it is that this has happened, and that this world is obviously important.
Yes, that sexuality is
everything to do with this world.
Sacred and spiritual, as well as every material atom.
Yeah, and the relationship side of life is immensely important, in fact more important than anything else. And unfortunately the emphasis, as you said, in these religious traditions was on really escaping from the body, or rejecting the body, rejecting relationships, particularly relationships with women and with children, and concentrating only on what was thought to be the spiritual life, not realizing that the true spiritual life includes the life of the body and the life of relationships, and that it's through those relationships that we learn. We don't learn by sitting on our backsides and meditating. We really don't, because if we do that without the relationship, we haven't really integrated into this world. And meditation is very helpful in balancing and calming, and also getting in touch with the deep levels of the soul. It's very important. But if you neglect the relationship side, you've really neglected the reason why you've come here.
Exactly. I mean, we've come here to participate in the beautiful world of matter, and to integrate all of our experiences, and to love each other in an infinite number of ways.
Exactly.
And that includes loving in and through the body.
I think that this was so important, really, in the teaching of Jesus. I think we can go to that now.
Yes, I think that's very important.
When he said, "Lift a stone, and I am there; cleave a piece of wood, and there I am." What was he saying other than that matter is sacred and that divinity is within everything?
That he is within a stone, within a piece of wood.
Exactly. And this is such an important realization. And really, in all the work that Andrew Harvey and I did in collecting the sayings for the mystic vision, which was one saying for every day of the year, we found the same teaching in all these traditions. We didn't find so much emphasis on the sacredness of the body, although we did put in one whole section on that, but we did find everywhere the sense that divinity is within every atom of matter.
That's right, and I think that what you were talking about is taking it a step beyond that, and that the new myth will and must include the material world and the body and the celebration of it, that the very participation in divinity is in and through the body.
Exactly. Without these five senses that we have, we couldn't relate to the environment of which we're a part. We couldn't know that we are a part of it. So the five senses are crucially important for connecting us to the earth.
Yes.
And they should never be looked down upon as something less than spiritual.
Yes, and you were talking the other day about, in the past, how sexuality and the senses had been repressed, and that now with the 60s revolution and later, that their sexuality is so much freer, or we feel so much freer with our sexuality, but that still is not freeing the body or sexuality in the way that would allow us to develop and celebrate our divinity, that there is still something lacking.
Well, unfortunately, it's gone too much into the unconsciousness, really, of our behavior. There's too much exploitation of sexuality for every conceivable reason, from selling cars to
exactly, selling anything.
And also there's the exploitation of man by woman and woman by man, using them as a sexual object.
Exactly.
And also there's the sexualization of children far too young, that they're made aware of the sexuality, without bringing in the sacred aspect of it and the fact that relationship requires responsibility. So what we have is a kind of hedonistic immersion in sexuality without any conscious realization of what we're doing and how we're demeaning ourselves and sexuality by behaving in this hedonistic way in which we can have anything we want when we want it, one night stands, whatever. You just go out on the internet, you contact somebody, you meet him, you sleep with him, you forget him the next day and then move on to the next. That is terrible, and it's really deeply shocking to me, as not from the point of view that it's against religious teaching, but from the point of view that it's against the sacredness of life.
That's beautifully said, against the sacredness of life. And the fact that we don't have the respect, we don't look at all those activities as sacred, means that we cannot allow that energy to rise in us and fully integrate all aspects of life. And we see this all over the world in the abuse, the sexual abuse, not only of our own bodies and others, but of children.
And not only that, you have the sexual exploitation of women who are really sex slaves, virtually. They come into a country.
Money on the sexuality.
Yes, and they're really prisoners in different countries now. Their passports are taken away, and that is a most terrible evil of treatment of women there. But that comes through from this same myth of the fall, that women are inferior and therefore can be used in any way men want. Yeah, and that is a shocking abuse of women. And there's another one, which is in the Islamic tradition, the clitoral excision, for instance. That is another evil, a great evil, and an abuse of the body, which is deeply wrong. But if one sees this from a different perspective of life being sacred, then you see you can align yourself with a different understanding of where we're going wrong and where we can correct our behavior.
Yes, and there's tremendous freedom within the vision of the sacred. It isn't that we have to follow someone else's laws about sexuality. Is that once we are living the vision of the sacred, then we have that freedom of expressing that sacredness and that love and that interconnectedness in our own way, because
Yes, we're not obeying any rules. We're
We're not.
discovering it from within.
That's
We're
right.
really finding the instinct which protects life rather than the instinct that exploits it.
Exactly.
And I think that's
Yeah.
something that is very important.
And no one else can tell us how to behave in that way, because we know deeply from within our own selves what is respectful and sacred and freeing and nurturing and loving.
Well, we would do if we didn't follow the values of the culture, which have become very decadent and debased. So we have to really move away from those values and rethink our whole system of values,
Exactly.
and then express them in a different way.
Exactly.
This will take time. I mean, it could take many years or decades. But I think people can see, they can see also the terrible films and videos that are sold which depict violence of every form, which really corrupt the young. I can't remember, somewhere I have the number of hours that an American child has seen, the number of murders that it's seen by the time it's 18,
Yes,
and rapes and violent scenes of every kind. This is really a total distortion of our nature, and it reflects the split. It doesn't reflect how we should be behaving or what's nice to watch for entertainment, but it comes from the distortion of our nature that's come from the split. And it's usually men who are making these videos, and they involve images of violence to women very often. And this is, again, outrageous. It's all done in the name of freedom. But what is freedom that can abuse another person or gives them images of abuse of another person?
And ultimately
that's no
destroy
freedom.
soul and our connection.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
it.
It destroys soul, and it destroys the soul of our children.
Yes.
And I think it's time that women in particular spoke out against this real rape of the children's natures which goes on in television.
Yes, because people haven't realized the power of image.
Exactly.
For a long time, people said, well, you can see something on television, that's not going to have any effect on the children. But I think that consciousness is growing, that it definitely does. In fact, studies have been shown that to prove, and that's what the Western world loves, some kind of external proof that it does, and that proof now exists.
It does exist, definitely, and that should be called upon and used, because, as I say, it's an abuse of freedom, that sort of, the whole scenario, really, of violence on films.
It is decadent, not being...
And it gives children the idea that this is what life is like.
Yes,
or that life should be like.
That's right, that this is the way it is.
This is
you
the way
can't
it
change
is.
it.
And then what do they have to do then? They have to become violent themselves in order to defend themselves.
In order to be a man,
themselves.
very often.
Yeah.
Your thought. But what about so many people in the Western world are Christians and relate to what they think of as sacred and divine in the image of Jesus? What about Jesus in relation to sexuality, passion, violence, or nonviolence? Where does he stand in all that?
Well, Jesus, first of all, he was an awakened man. I think that's very clear. He was awakened to the truth, really, about the reality of life, what life was, the divinity of life, and to the sacred. And he was trying to teach this to people. I mean, why did he say, turn the other cheek? What were his other sayings? Forgive your brother. I mean, his whole emphasis was on compassionate behaviour. And he said, whoever injures one of these little children will be as if he had a millstone hung around his neck. Well, what was that? How we can apply that to the way we treat our children, you know?
Well, in fact, if we think not just in the worst case scenario and the abusing physically or sexually of our children, but we truly do not have or place our emphasis on nurturing and protecting children, giving them wonderful education. In many countries, we don't spend the money on education.
We prefer to spend it on arms and weapons.
And exactly, and we'll send them to buildings that are dreadful and depressing, and not have an education that nurtures their feeling function and the soul.
I think that if our education system was really grounded in the true love of children, the care of children, the nurturing of their souls, we would see quite a different format emerging, and we would see far more attention paid to things like music, to poetry, to dancing, to acting, and far less emphasis on the development of the intellect, or at least that there would be a better balance between them.
Certainly we would want to balance, and the intellect would be an entirely different thing if it is rerouted in the right brain in the music
if
and
there's
dance.
a balance between the two hemispheres
Yes.
of the brain, and if the heart is allowed to develop, because our educational system really kills the heart.
It does.
And it destroys children's joy and trust in life. And
Exactly.
so they come into life as these exquisite creatures, not contaminated with sin, I may say, but as joyous children reach out to life, reach out to adults, and they should be met with love and appreciation, and also awareness of the need for sensitivity to how children think and what they need.
Exactly.
And that is lacking. And I also feel that putting children into nursery school from infancy is a disaster, because it really takes them from the mother too soon.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this has become the habit in our culture, that women have to go out to work, often for financial reasons, if not for the will to work, the wish to work. But women, I think, should be aware before they embark on having a child that it's absolutely essential for the first 18 months that the infant is with the mother, because the bond is so deep and so powerful and so strong, and also the whole thing of the mother's, even her smell, her voice, her touch, all these the child learns from and develops its consciousness in those first months through the connection. Now, if that child is put into an atmosphere where it doesn't know who the adults are, there's no intimate connection, it's confused, and it may develop perfectly well intellectually, but its emotional life is damaged.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think absolutely needs to be made clear.
Mm-hmm.
And we've lost that in the last 50 years because of the emphasis on women being educated and going out to work.
Well, and we used to have the extended family, so that when the mother
There was always
away,
the aunt or somebody,
grandmother, and someone that the child knew.
There is this still. I mean, grandmothers still do a tremendous amount of helping work with the
yes,
grandchildren.
they do. And
But I don't think that women, there hasn't, although there have been plenty of books written, but this information is not reaching governments. It's not reaching the people who, as it were, build the schools or set out the educational syllabus, nor is it reaching the whole thing that nursery schools are the answer to women going out to work.
well, there is now some talk, at least, and some actualization of it, that there are nurseries where the mother works and where sometimes the father works, but at least the mother can be with the child as long as she can, and then she takes them there, and on her break she is there, and at lunch they have lunch together, that they're building these places.
That's a very good idea.
Yes, and it works beautifully, and then the father and mother sometimes the father will also come for lunch. There are so many possibilities in which the child may be with others for several hours a day, but there's that continuous threading back and forth.
Yes,
so
as long as there's somebody the child can recognise that he knew or she knew from birth. And it's equally at the other end of life to have the hospices for the care of the dying.
That happens again.
So at both ends we need to have a different attitude and develop greater sensitivity to people's needs.
To their needs, and you've talked about those needs as being the need to connect, to relate, and to nurture the heart. And Joseph Chilton Pearce speaks so beautifully about the mind and of all of that energy moving up from the reptilian brain up through the other brains, but that the fifth component of the brain is the heart, and that children who are truly connected to the heart, and when we can keep that connection, that we are able to think and create in such a much more powerful
in a different way.
Yes,
go
but
ahead.
just when we're thinking, if we don't have these things that can keep that flow going, because the child is protected and nurtured and knows that it's not separated from its source, its parents or whatever, that then this cycle of energy can flow. But if we become fearful, that the energy goes back to the reptilian brain and we become aggressive and protective and ultimately violent.
And also the neocortex, the neocortical brain, which is all the higher functions, so to speak, that we've developed as humans, can't develop. So we get stuck at the mammalian level, and therefore we're stuck at the most primitive level of instinct. And that's why there's so much violence in the streets, why there are gangs of young men, because they haven't been able to develop those higher skills. They have no awareness of the distance between what they're feeling and acting it out. They simply act out what they feel immediately, and if they want to kill somebody, they kill them. So that comes from failure at the very first moments of life, the first months of life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's so important that we really need to stress it, that to keep the evolutionary energy flowing, or the developmental energy flowing, is that that child needs protection, needs to know that it's safe, and needs to be connected in feeling and love on the heart level to those around him. Otherwise, it will, the energy will shrink back, and as you say, the newer components of the brain cannot develop and therefore cannot connect to the heart.
No.
And that severing from feeling and love gets us into all kinds of
trouble,
and aggression.
and it leads to the kind of culture that we have
that
now.
we have today.
And this is all known, this is all written
It
about.
is indeed.
And yet it doesn't reach the educational system. Women and men in, say, late adolescence are not told these facts before they embark on their partnerships and things. They're not told of this, nor are they told, most importantly, that if you take drugs and if you become addicted to alcohol or anything, this affects not only your children, but your grandchildren. So you're actually programming your grandchildren to having diseases and illnesses and weaknesses in their immune system.
That's right.
That they needn't have had if you hadn't indulged in this way of behaving when you were 16 or 17 or whatever.
That's right. Plus they will also have the tendency toward addiction, a much greater tendency.
Exactly, they will inherit that. Yes, and all this is not taught in our schools, and it could be. So anyway, we both feel very strongly about this, obviously.
Very strong, but because children must have, the emphasis must be on protecting children. Everything that is coming into being,
the life
so to
that's
speak,
coming into the
must
world.
Be protected and nurtured, and that as adults is our first responsibility now, and as elders it's also our first responsibility, is that everything that's coming into being must be nurtured through feeling and love and protection, so that those energies of the mind and heart can flow freely and develop.
Yeah.
So the individual child's development depends upon it, and the evolution of our species depends upon it.
And I think also this carries on into the treatment of women all over the world, and I think it is dawning on governments that if they don't nurture or protect the women who are one half of the human race, they're going to have endless trouble, just what you've said really, that it's in educating the women, in protecting the women, in giving them protection from perhaps violent partners or from being abused or oppressed by whatever belief system they happen to live in, that in itself will make a huge change in the evolutionary development of humanity, because if you protect the women and give them the means to protect themselves, then you will protect the children. And that will, that is one of the main avenues. And I think the UN is working on this, and I hope will work more. I think there's a new agenda in front of the UN now to develop this much more.
Yes, there is. But I think there's also a tremendous advantage for the men, because as men are able to protect that loving, feeling, nurturing aspect of the woman for the children, who can then give it to the children, they are protecting and allowing that to develop within themselves.
Absolutely, yes, exactly. And that, but they had to in the past become warriors, or if they were drawn to the monastic life, they became priests or monks. But they couldn't really nurture this feminine quality. They were not allowed to by their culture.
No,
and are still not allowed to.
And when that happens, we have a violent culture. And certainly, in going back to the image of Jesus, Jesus was sensitive to women. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, and perhaps Mary Magdalene?
Yes, because it's becoming clear, particularly from the Gnostic Gospels, that Jesus had an intimate relationship with Mary Magdalene. And I think that what's the tremendous success of the Dan Brown books is, or particularly the Da Vinci Code, is that there was the relationship that he described, or he allowed to take place between the two of them, and that this is something that is in the collective psyche. This is the longing for the balance and the relationship between the male and the female at the highest spiritual level.
Exactly.
And also on the physical level.
Yes.
Because so that it was always thought by these religions, particularly Christianity, that Jesus had to be pure, he had to be uncontaminated by sin. Even the Virgin Mary had to be uncontaminated by the sin of intercourse, so to speak. So there's never been this parity between the two sexes. There's never been the true divine relationship or sacred marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And we need that so badly in our culture. It's missing. Although we have the image of the Virgin Mary, she's not married to Jesus. So Mary Magdalene fills that gap. And I think that's why people are so attracted to that
because
book.
they know intuitively that that is what is natural and that's what is needed for our own spiritual development.
Yeah.
But Maria Gambutas used to say that, Mary was, of course, a later reflection of the great feminine images from prehistory, but that she was very limited simply to virgin and mother.
Yes.
And I think that purity, that if we could allow Jesus to have the relationship, the sexual, passionate, sacred, sensitive relationship with the woman he loved, Mary Magdalena, that then we would see that purity is also in and through our passion and sexuality and our love through the body. But that's what the church had to destroy.
Yes, because Jesus had to be uncontaminated by woman and by sexuality, and that is one of the biggest mistakes in the church that's gone right through it. So I think we can say that is the reason the Da Vinci Code, or one of the reasons that it was so popular.
It certainly took off. But Jesus was also non-violent.
But he was non-violent.
And Christians have betrayed that aspect of Jesus, just as the church has.
Yes, and how can you call yourself a Christian and think that it's a good idea to go to war or invade Iraq or anything else? How can you think in that split way of thinking that being Christian means that you go to war and kill other people? When he said, turn the other cheek, love your brother as yourself, it seems to me just incomprehensible.
It is, and I think we should say that there are many Christians who remain true to that understanding of Jesus as non-violent, and they're very disturbed about much of the fundamental behavior, and they're asking the question, how can we remind people of what Christianity truly is at its roots?
But it's not only the fundamentalists. I mean, all through the history of Christianity, we've had this terrible slaughter in the name of God.
That's
so that's in the psyche, and that has to be made conscious of.